Herr Kollege? Oh. All right, John. Oh, interesting. How have you been?
Good.
Good. You still flitting about the landscape?
Yes, it was about 220.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, they kept classes right down there, and I said, wait a minute, I've already driven 100 miles, and now you're telling me the classes are canceled. And the reason is the kids can't walk from the dorms. I said, wait a minute, I drove 105 miles. Don't tell me about no walking. So this happened twice this semester. But, you know.
That is a big thing.
Yes.
Yeah, and very inefficient, but people will do that.
They wait till the last minute to cancel.
Yeah. We did the same thing. On the one day we canceled. Yeah, we waited too late.
Waited too late.
Good.
So what are you doing? What are you teaching this semester? If anything.
Actually, I'm teaching Leibniz.
Oh, I know him.
You know him. One of my pet courses. Yeah.
Oh, yes.
So yeah.
So what text are you using?
A little of this and a little of that. Yeah. A mixture.
Yeah. Well, he's done
For
everything, right?
Actually, for the monadology, we're using my edition for it, which puts it into a more accessible context. Yeah.
Oh, that's a wonderful book.
Yeah.
That's my second favorite book of yours. Right behind the coherence theory of truth.
Ah, that goes way back.
Hi. How are you?
Good.
And then writing.
Writing? Actually, at the moment, I'm writing something that's remotely connected with what I'm talking about.
No, it's good. Why are you unique?
I'm fine. I'm writing about Kurt Gödel's worries that Leibniz had anticipated him, and am both looking at what his worries were and the extent to which they were justified. So I'll talk about that probably at some point, probably in the fall. I'll talk about that here because it's kind of interesting. Sorry. I'm fine. I owe you an apology. I've been sort of slightly unavailable, but things have been a little hectic in various ways, and I appreciate your understanding, and we'll try to be better, but we'll see.
It does happen to everyone at some point. I think this month of January has been sort of changing for everyone.
It has been, yeah.
It's especially good to be able to come to a seminar like this and not have in the background how to reposition and revocabularize the content for an undergraduate class. Just enjoy it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. One does it one's own way.
You know, you mentioned undergrad.
It gets done.
When I'm teaching undergrads, I start teaching college. Oh, and I can't get that.
Good.
Of course, we have to dumb it down somewhat. And then I'm going, you're doing this. I'm wondering if
Right, let's get started for today's lecture.
Before introducing
Yeah.
someone who does not need an introduction of today's speaker, I want to make a few announcements. At 3:30 on Friday, Majvita Chirimuta will be giving a lecture in the annual lecture series talk organized by the center. The lecture is at 3:30 on the 10th floor, and the title is Prediction versus Understanding in Computationally Enhanced Neuroscience. So you're all invited to come to this talk. It will be followed by a reception after the lecture and the Q&A. And on Tuesday at noon in this room, Lisa Miyachi from Penn is going to be talking about embodied cognition and the causal roles of the mental. So you're also all invited to come listen to Lisa next week. And also, if you're interested, she'll be around for 48 hours, and I think it might be possible to meet with her if you want to talk to her. I think Majvita is the person to contact if you want to talk talk with Lisa. Today, it's my great pleasure to introduce Nick Recher, who is a distinguished university professor of philosophy here at Spit in the philosophy department. He's also the chairman of the Center for Philosophy of Science. Nick needs, as I said earlier, no introduction. He wrote more than 100 books. He has been the president of all the associations that matter, pretty much, including the American Philosophical Association. Most relevant, he's been president of the American Leibniz Society, which is relevant for today's meeting. He's a member of so many academies that I didn't have the time to make a list of all of them. And he's been awarded many prizes. In 2016, most recently, he was awarded the Helmholtz Medal by the German Academy of Sciences. And it's a wonderful pleasure to have Nick again here at the center. So Nick, the floor.
Thank you for Many thanks for those kind remarks. I'll do this. I want to deliberate a little bit about the origins of artificial intelligence and deliberation in the earliest days. Am I speaking loud enough? Can you hear me in back at this level? Okay, I'll try that. The deliberations on the subjects of can machines think, a problem made topical and difficult in the history of modern philosophy by Descartes, of course, because given mind-matter dualism and given the absolute worse than Chinese wall separation of thought and matter, the issue of can machines think was extremely problematic at the time. Now, at the time, I hope, am I in the way here? Maybe I should move this thing aside. The pictures are really worth the price of admission. So this is the figure on whom my deliberations will center, looking at you in the way that you expect from the innumerable other pictures you've seen of him, with the great wig of the era of Louis XIV on his head, a wig that shrunk considerably by the time of Kant and nowadays survives only for barristers in the United Kingdom. Actually, Leibniz did not really look like that. He resembled us much more because he looked like that. And it was quite convenient in the era of big wigs to be bald, because nobody noticed that you looked any different from anybody else. Leibniz was born in 1646 in Leipzig in Germany, just at the end of the 30 Years' War, when Europe was struggling to come to terms with the division of the whole scene from one end to the other into Protestants and Catholics and various sorts of mixtures. And Leibniz, of course, struggled with that problem, and his work on the reunion of the churches was geared in that direction. There is no doubt that Leibniz was a prodigy. There were two very good schools in Leipzig, the St. Thomas School and the St. Nicholas School. Leibniz went to that one, but he was really autodidact. I mean, the object of schooling in those days was to put you in command of classical languages and classical literature, and Leibniz had already, before he started school, learned Latin, and was a devoted Latinist for the rest of his life. When on any official occasion a poem or celebratory address or motto had to be produced, Leibniz was the man to come up with it. He had the tremendous good fortune, after finishing his studies, to be sent on a mission to Paris. He was working for the monarch Duke of Mainz, sitting on the Rhine, and the Mainzers conceived of the slightly crazy idea of persuading the French, instead of pushing their power across the Rhine and into the Netherlands and other parts of Europe, to divert them to Egypt on another crusade. And the Mainzers sent a small delegation to Paris to persuade the Duke of Pomponne, the foreign minister of Louis XIV, to contemplate the possibility of an Egyptian expedition. It is said, I have no idea with what degree of correctness, that this stayed alive in the consciousness of Parisian officialdom to the era of Napoleon, when indeed the French did launch an expedition into Egypt. Leibniz, after spending a couple of joyous years in Paris talking to everybody worth talking to and ignoring his otherwise unprofitable official duties, Leibniz was quite reluctantly but firmly recruited into the service of the Duke of Kallenberg, or Hanover as it then was, and then went from Paris to, by the way, Paris was really the only, apart from London, perhaps the only significant European city of the time, and an enormous complex. The Rue Colbert was the home of the Académie des Sciences, and then the Bibliothèque du Roi was opposite. It was the center of European culture and learning, and the fact that he became absolutely fluent in French was critical for Leibniz in his subsequent development, because French was the official language of the European elite from one end of the continent to the other. But Leibniz went to Hanover. Hanover was beginning to come into its salad days. It managed to get a good deal of funding by being on the payroll of Louis XIV for sitting out the wars between France and the rest of Europe. The Hanoverians had a remarkably sizable army. The number of the representation of citizenry in the Hanoverian military service was about the same as it was in the United States at the height of World War II. So the Hanoverian army was quite useful, because it was able to be bought off by being persuaded to sit on its sword. And the Hanoverians put this money to good use. They renovated the palace. That's the palace in the foreground. The Leine River is just on this side of it. They commissioned a French architect, Remy de la Fosse, to build some various complexes for it, and it became a more significant city as a result of these French subsidies. The town was, of course, fortified like any other town. the river line that cuts through there. On the left, you have the Neustadt, the newer part of the town, where slightly different circumstances prevailed. It was, of course, a Protestant dukedom. The Catholics, however, were enabled to build a church in the new city, as was the Jewish community. The finances of Hanover were handled by a Jewish financier who had considerable influence at court and was able to persuade Hanover to create a synagogue, which incidentally no longer exists, but there is a memorial on the site, and there is a daily infusion of flowers from I know not what source that appears there. The pride and joy of the Hanoverian court. That's sort of what the old city looked like. Leibniz had quarters in the court for a while, but then there were renovations, and a theater was installed, and Leibniz and the library were moved out. This shows the alley going out to Herrenhausen, where there was created on the model of Versailles. Of course, everybody mirrors the power of the day. The splendid garden surrounded by stream and be decked with large fountains, which were greatly the fashion of the day. The water supply often went wrong, and one of Leibniz's many services as engineer was to be involved in the maintenance and renovation and repair of the waterworks there. When Leibniz was moved out of the palace, he was moved into this rather handsome house, which belonged to an aristocratic widow. The house was rented by the Duke. The quarters that Leibniz occupied were here, and he shared his residence with the library. His official title was librarian. Librarian in those days was a significant office in the few courts that had it, probably Paris being the only one, possibly in Italy there were others. Leibniz didn't sort of check out books and so on. His vision of what the librarianship involved was a bit different. It was akin to what the Library of Congress does for the government in the United States nowadays. That is to say, to provide an expert service for information that needs to be had. Leibniz was closely. This is his in front there, the bay window where he had his work table. This is the father of George I of Britain, the Duke Ernst August, who was Leibniz's perhaps main sponsor. Leibniz had considerably friendly relations with him, and persuaded him to allow him, Leibniz, to be involved in one of the dukedom's main sources of income, the Harz Mines, for where he had interesting ideas that I'll mention in a moment. This is a very important lady in Leibniz's life, the Electra Sophia, the wife of Ernst August and the mother of George I. She was, after the Act of Settlement, the heiress to the throne of Britain. And because there were perhaps 6 or so people of closer relationship to the Tudor house, but the Act of Settlement decreed that you were not going to be eligible for succession if you were Catholic. And the Electress Sophia, as she became, was the closest Protestant heir. Unfortunately for Leibniz, who was her buddy, her correspondent, and really the only person in the Hanoverian court who had an interest in English affairs, who knew a bit of English, and who was in close contact with what was going on in Britain. He was her official advisor, and she would have brought him across to London had, unfortunately, Queen Anne, who's now featured interestingly in the movies, I forget the title of it. It's currently going in full blast. Had she not died, sorry? The favorite. Thank you very much. Yes, the Duchess of Marlborough was the favorite, and there were interesting relationships between the Duchess and Queen Anne. Queen Anne made the career mistake of dying just a little too soon. Had she lived another couple of months, the Electress would have succeeded in London, and Leibniz would have gone across and become her counselor and advisor. Unfortunately, it was not to be. His relationship with George Louis, the elector who became George I, were complicated, and he was not invited to come along. This interesting scene is the arrival of the Hanoverians in London, the official parade. You notice how the carriages have to be spun back and forth because the line of carriages is much too long for anything other than otherwise what would be a march past. Leibniz, in his usual role as ingenious provider of all kinds of information and things, was heavily involved in this medal. I want you to notice particularly, well, there's George I looking rather more ugly than he did even in real life, perhaps. But on the right is the Hanoverian white stallion, the heraldic symbol of Hanover. And you will notice that its rear hooves are in Hanover and its front hooves are in London. It is making the leap from Hanover to London, and has the splendid motto, unus non sufficit orbis, one realm is not enough for us. We Hanoverians are happy to take over in Britain, and Leibniz designed that thing. He is buried in this church, in the Neustadt, in the new. You will, if you go there, you will see a handsome bronze plaque over his grave. It survived when the Russians first, of course, the Brits, because of the traditional connection to Hanover, were able to have Hanover be in the British zone of occupation in Germany, and the connection with Hanover was in that way maintained. But Montgomery was not allowed to make his push across Europe. The Russians reached Hanover first, and took along, of course, as they did in most everything that wasn't nailed down. One of the things that wasn't nailed down was a very handsome bronze plaque on the grave of Leibniz, saying "Ossa Leibnizii," Leibniz's bones, and the sexton of that church, which suffered some damage, took the precaution of piling a vast amount of rubble on Leibniz's grave, and so it was not noted that there was this handsome, large bronze plaque available. Okay, so much then for the person. His work was, of course, primarily in mathematics. Leibniz never had much formal training in mathematics. Heaven only knows where he got his extensive mathematical knowledge from, but he, in the Parisian days, acquired it rapidly and was in touch with all, in the wake of Descartes, of course, so with Pascal and others. France was a center of mathematical work, and Leibniz established contact with all those people and developed at that time not only his contribution to the calculus, but the calculus of variations, determinants, any number of mathematical innovations. Leibniz was like Leonardo, a typical Renaissance figure, a little late for the Renaissance, but never mind. He Leonardo said it with art. Leibniz said it with mathematics. He had all kinds of innovations there. Look at some of them. Binary illumination, this enumeration, this binary arithmetic was one of the things that he was interested in. He set out the rules of calculation and took pains to enumerate numbers in the binary system. Whoops. Yeah, this is the Berkester-Crone, the curve of most rapid descent. You roll a ball bearing along a curve, and of course, how does it get to the end most quickly? Shortest distance is fine, but gravity doesn't give it enough of an initial push to move it along. Dropping it a lot makes the average velocity really speedy, but unfortunately the path gets too long. In between, there is an optimal path, and this was a problem set at the time, and Leibniz solved it. He was at heart an engineer. He had all kinds of projects in engineering. This is the idea of basically work in a tank. A tank creates its own surface as it moves along, and this is what these wheels do. The inner wheel uses the outer wheel as an ongoing road to move it along along muddy pathways and so on. This is one of the things he devised for mining, where you're constantly sloshing water out of the mines or other things. Interestingly, notice the shape of the gear that holds the ropes. As the ropes get shorter, of course, the rotation gives it more power, and so the further down the thing goes, there's a balance between the weight of the ropes and the mechanism's strength. One of his favorite ideas was an alternative windmill. Your normal windmill goes around this way. This has scoops, which goes around that way. That eliminates one of the gearings. Normally you take the power from here and have to send it down. This does it directly. Leibniz thought that it would be more efficient to use scoops instead of windmills, and was totally unable to persuade the mining authorities in the Harz that this was a good idea. Leibniz was a member of academies. He belonged to the Académie Française when he was in Paris. He gave the Brits showed them a copy of his calculating machine when he made a visit to London, and was made a member of the Royal Society on that basis. He was a great believer in the organization of scholarship and science, partly from personal experience and partly from general theory. He made valiant efforts to create academies. He was able to use his contacts with the Hanoverian connections because the Hanoverian princess married the Elector of Brandenburg and became Queen of Prussia. Charlotte, pushed Leibniz's cause in Berlin, and Leibniz's attempt to create an academy in Berlin was in fact successful, and he was the first and quite active president of that academy until things went politically wrong. He made comparable attempts in Vienna, and he had audiences with Peter the Great to present him with the idea of an academy in St. Petersburg, which ultimately was started, but after Leibniz's life, a bit too late for him. This is a later picture of the Berlin Academy, of which Leibniz was the founding president. Now, on to machines and thought. This is the Pascaline. This is Pascal's version of a calculating machine. It is a calculating machine quite useful for somebody who does accounting, where adding and subtracting are of the essence. And Pascal, of course, had some role there. This machine was produced and was in service for a while, and of course was highly limited. It could do only addition and subtraction. And Leibniz's idea was that there should be a machine that did everything, that did all the standard arithmetical operations, and he designed such a thing and had it built. He had it built any number of times because he used it to good effect on various occasions as a sort of carte de visite, or introduction. He gave a copy of the machine to Tsar Peter. Peter liked it so well, he asked for another one to be made so that he could present it to the Emperor of China. He used it, as I say, to establish his contact with the Royal Society. And in general, he used it as a promotional device. He had a number of them produced, never quite the same. He was always tinkering with it and making improvements. The problem is, of course, it has lots of moving parts. It is a very complicated piece of machinery. It could only be made really under his supervision by expert clockmakers, and it tended to break down, and then when it broke down, people stashed it away in an attic somewhere. Fortunately, one of these attic copies was survived and is pictured here. It relied, whoops, where am I going? Yeah, there. Do I have a better picture of that? Yeah. It relied, well, you can see where, it relied on a strange looking gear. You don't see it all that clearly here. You don't actually see it all that clearly here either, but you see how it's stepped along the diagonal there. It gets caught at various levels of height it gets engaged. This is called the Staffelwalze. It's also known as the Leibniz gear, a stepped gear. It still exists and does various pieces of useful service. And it's critical for his calculating machine because you need to be able to carry. Ultimately, you go along adding 1, 2, 3, 4 is fine, but then you come to 9, and thereafter you're in 2 digits. And when you skip digits, you have to bring another level of mechanism into operation. Anybody interested in the workings? There's a beautiful model of it on the web. Which shows exactly how the gearing works and how it does its job of carrying. It's a fascinating little contraption. I wish they were sold at 5 and dime, but it isn't. But you can look at it and see how it functions. When Leibniz had his audience with Leopold I, the Holy Roman Emperor, it took a lot of doing and preparatory work to get an audience. I don't know how many philosophers nowadays there are who have had audiences with multiple heads of state. With Leibniz, it was not just one; it was easily 8 or 10. He got around, and it took a lot of doing to get around. And when he got around to Leopold, he presented him, as he always did, with projects that he had in view. He was always selling various projects. Of course, the prime project was the Academy of Sciences. That was his main objective. But there were many other suggestions along the way, useful tips on how to improve urban lighting, how to improve medical services. He had lots of ideas. One of the ideas that he had in preparation for this audience with Leopold, was the idea of a cryptographic machine, a machine for encoding and decoding text. That machine was based on classical principles. What you of course had since antiquity. Julius Caesar used it. A simple transposition code, one letter being represented by another. There were devices. These are sort of substitution codes. These are devices that you can use for making that more automatic when the thing is actually being employed. You have input letters and output letters, and you have a little wheel that enables you to match them up and change them, or you have sticks that can be aligned differently and used for encoding. None of these devices, of course, are terribly secure. And what Leibniz had in mind was a machine which has the advantage of taking successive letters of the alphabet, so that you write your text, and each successive letter of the alphabet gets encoded by a different code. So you switch from one to the other, so you don't have the same uniform coding for text along the line. You have to take each letter and have its own code. Tremendously laborious, but if you can automate it, it can be made much simpler and automatic, and this is what Leibniz's machine did. Like much later coding machines, right up to Enigma of World War II, you use a keyboard. Now, of course, in World War II, they had typewriter keyboards. Leibniz did not have a typewriter. He had a pianoforte. He had a piano, and so his keyboard is slightly differently designed. You have this shifting gear, which shifts everything. You can set the thing differently. You can say shift after every third letter, or shift after every fifth letter, and you can have a variety of ways of setting the thing that makes it, from the cryptographic point, remarkably secure. It would have taken modern electronic devices to make it possible to decode this kind of text if used carefully. And you need an immense amount of text to even begin to work with it. I mean, there's no doubt that it was breakable by 20th century means, but for 200 years or so, it would have been perfectly secure. Leopold, when Leibniz had this audience, what he did was he prepared for it very carefully. He made 3 memoranda. First, just a list of talking points. Secondly, a list of slight elaboration on those talking points as a sort of reminder, something to look at the night before that you want to make sure you have. And then a long memorandum, about 70 pages, which described each proposal in considerable detail. The idea being that this got left behind for the technical experts of the emperor to evaluate and see if they could make use of it. The description, Leibniz, unlike the calculating machine, Leibniz never had the cryptographic machine produced, but he described in the long memorandum in considerable detail how it was going to be put together. And so it became possible for us to reconstruct it. And if you want to see it in action, go to the 3rd floor of Hillman Library. In special collections, they've got it sitting up there. We had it made in Hanover by Leibniz machine experts, and you can see it. You can see it in operation. There's one other copy. You can go to Hanover in the Leibniz Museum at the university there, and they've also had a copy made. A very handsome piece of equipment. The guys who produced it on Leibnizian principles did a superb job, and it works. Here's the museum in Hanover where it is. It was a major step in, would have been a major step in cryptanalysis had the Viennese authorities not, who had a remarkably efficient intelligence service, a remarkably effective decoding and encoding operation, and like all people involved in cryptology, felt that their own methods were absolutely secure and we don't need anything better. The classic example of that comes from World War II. When the Americans and Brits started sinking submarines in great numbers, the submariners said, "This is fishy. They're just being too effective in locating us, and they must be breaking our codes in which we use to report information about location and movement." And when these reports from his mariners came in, Admiral Dönitz commissioned the best technical experts in the Naval Cryptographic Service to make a survey of the security of the Naval Enigma machine. And the guys who did this, able though they were the guys who themselves were responsible for the production and management of that machine. Had he gone to the Foreign Service and used the Foreign Service experts to make an analysis of it, he might have had a different reaction. These guys said, look, our machines are so complex that it would take an effort on an industrial scale to begin to decode them. Unfortunately, Bletchley Park was an effort on a more than industrial scale. There were more than 10,000 people at work at Bletchley Park working on German Enigma machines. And indeed, when the machine shifted from a 3-rotor to a 4-rotor operation, which I'll be happy to show you in due course. This is a later 1920s machine that's much the same as Leibniz's, has the drum with different alphabets. This is the Enigma. An early version of it has only 2 rotors. This is the typewriter keyboard. You have 2 of them, and you press one key and something else lights up. And you have 2 people operating it, one pushing the thing and one taking notes on what comes out. This is a lovely picture of the thing in action. This is Field Marshal Guderian's operation vehicle with the Enigma there and the operators there. This is Bletchley Park, an old mansion used. These huts were erected to provide housing for the zillions of people, begin to provide, service quarters, working quarters for the zillions of people who worked there. This is one of them that survived. This is a device constructed by the Brits to begin to decode text operating. When the Germans switched from 3 rotors to 4 rotors on that machine, it shut Bletchley Park down for 8 months. It took a tremendously long time to get back into action. And in fact, yeah, this is another copy of this is an American one when the Americans got into it. They produced, the Brits had a couple, we produced dozens of them. This is the famous 4-rotor Enigma, naval Enigma, that almost defeated Bletchley Park. This code was called FISH for some reason I don't quite understand, but FISH was one of the big hazards of World War II. Tony Flowers had to construct what is really an ancestor of an electronic computer to handle that text on a prompt basis, and it played an absolutely crucial part in the effectiveness of Allied operations Eisenhower said it shortened the war by 2 years. Other people said it made it possible to win the war at all. Okay, so much then for the machine. Leibniz was interested in the limits of finite automata and what could be done with them, and the use of and the mathematical replication of inference. He had a project of calculating logic, calculus ratiocinnator, which tried to arithmetize inferential operations. The time came, and I will someday talk about this here, when Gödel began to suspect strongly that Leibniz had anticipated his proof of the provability and completeness of axiomatic arithmetic. There was a real concern over the Gödelian result on the question of exactly what could be done to mechanize and automate human thought. With his best friend Leibniz, best friend Einstein, his best friend Einstein, who said that one of the great privileges of life at the Institute was the ability to walk home in the evening with Kurt Gödel. This is Fuld Hall, where the Institute was housed in those days. This is Firestone Library. An interesting, to me, aside is when I was working on my dissertation at Princeton on Leibniz's cosmology, there was somebody who kept calling back the Leibniz books that I wanted and from whom I had to call back books that I needed, and that was Gödel. we constantly exchanged book requests at Firestone. I saw him a number of times, but I never had the nerve to go and speak to him. I did get up courage on one occasion to go to Fuld Hall and see if he was in, but he was not in on that occasion. But what was interesting to me was his office. His office was a little cubbyhole, very sparse in its furnishings, nothing in it except an empty bookshelf with a couple of batches of reprints, one of which I have to confess to my shame, I made off with, and even more to my shame, I've lost since those days. But there it is. Okay, so now what about artificial intelligence? First of all, Leibniz Museum. This is the classic quotation from the monadology, which everybody who knows anything about Leibniz has thought about calculation and mental operations, quotes and misunderstands completely. It's a very Cartesian sounding passage, right? You think you can create a machine that does thinking, but if you take that machine and just blow it up to the point where you can walk around in it and look at it, you see that all you've got are gears interacting and things whizzing away and working and pushing and pulling one another. What is thinking about this? There's no possible connection, and so we only find parts pushing one another and never anything that explains perception or thought in any way. That, however, is only the start of the Leibnizian story, because the Leibnizian story goes on to say what I have put forth here, namely that the machines that we make are not machines all the way down. You look at a gear and finally you come to a piece of metal. You look in that and you just have a bit of metallic stuff or a bit of wood or something. you have a transition from something that's a machine to something that's just a chunk of natural material. And that will never do the job. What does the job is that the machines of nature, the machines created by God, that is to say organisms, and especially higher level organisms, are still machines even in their smallest part ad infinitum, right? This is the monadological point of view. And it's this that constitutes the difference between the machines of nature and of divine artifice, so that it's not, my friend and co-author Herb Simon wanted to say that the question, can machines think, finds its answer in the questions, can humans think? Because humans are machines. That's the Simon story. And Leibniz would agree, but with a crucial proviso, namely that humans are machines of divine contrivance, something radically different from the familiar machines of human artifice. Our machines are as remote from God's as the finite is from the infinite, making for a difference in degree that really makes for a difference in kind. So can machines think? Yes, with Herb Simon, sure, but it takes a God to make the kind of machine that can think, because it's got to go along all the way down. Now, what about mechanization of thought? Well, what does thinking consist in for Leibniz, and perhaps for us too? There are two main functions, two main operations. One is the formulation of information in text, textualization, propositions, statements, what have you. And the interpretation of statements, that is to say, transposing them from the language of the person who utters them to whatever language you yourself have or might be able to use, is a matter of just that, of transposing things from one mode of expression into another. And what kind of machine can transpose text from one mode of operation to another? Question, answer, cryptographic machines. That's exactly what a cryptographic machine does. It takes one sort of text and puts it into another. All right, so formulation of text and information is the one crucial aspect of thought, and the other crucial aspect of thought is inference. Now you have several propositions, and whether you do a syllogism or some other, you have premises and a conclusion, you draw in one body of information out from others. For Leibniz, and indeed for Gödel after him, that process of reasoning is arithmetizable. It can be managed by calculation, right? That was the whole idea of Leibniz's project, worked on through many years in many forms, of the calculus ratiocinator, of a calculus of reasoning. And so you have these two kinds of machines. This is what integrates his machine thinking and his philosophical position. You have these two kinds of machines, one for managing information, one for extracting inferences from information, and they are no more than analogs. They are finite analogs. They are imperfect machine counterparts, but they are indications of the kind of mechanical operation that can simulate and reproduce the processes that are infinitely more subtly available to God-made intelligences. So machine thought is indeed possible, and we can see it crudely in these machines, but we have to think of this as no more than a rough analogy to what happens in the real world, so to speak. And that leads me to my final observation about Leibniz. That is to say, the logical positivists had the great project of the unity of science, the fact that scientific inquiry ought to be thought of as as a unified whole, where the entire world of learning, so to speak, of scientific learning, exists and coexists in mutual and reciprocal support within one large framework of understanding. And in a way, that was fundamental to Leibniz's vision, the idea of the unity of reason, the idea that every branch of inquiry, every mode of investigating nature, every mode of investigating the realm of abstract thought was part of one large, mutually supportive, systematically integrated and fructifying whole. And that you could not think of yourself as being a philosopher, a person dedicated to wisdom and knowledge, without having some degree of interest in the totality of what comes along in learning. One of the great joys that every freshman who meets in an introductory philosophy course for the first time Descartes, one of the great joys that every such student has is when reading the discourse on method. What does the discourse on method say? It says, look, everybody has been barking up the wrong tree. You notice that big library full of books. You realize that even if you spend every waking hour of every day reading it, you'll really know more than a fraction of it. There's all that learning out there. Don't let that be a burden to you. Forget it. It doesn't matter. You have the real basis for knowledge and understanding programmed within yourself through the access that you have to your own self, your own mind. All those books that I learned when I was at La Flèche studying with the Jesuits, they don't matter. Don't feel guilty that you haven't read all those books. It doesn't have any account. Go in there and get down to the roots of the thinking that you find when you go for secure and categorically unproblematic knowledge as you have it in self-perception. Leibniz takes exactly the opposite view. You should feel guilty every time you pass a book that you have not and will never read. There is something in there that is of use and significance for you and that you could extract if only you had the time and effort and courage to get in there and do it. The idea that the philosopher has an obligation to the impossible task of integrating knowledge is deeply imbued in the Leibnizian spirit, but not just as an ideological thing, but as a device. You can see time and again in his philosophy how ideas from biology, from physics, from mathematics, from computation theory, how they all come together in some way or other to inform an aspect of his philosophical position. I think that's what makes Leibniz both daunting and intensely interesting. Thank you very much.
Right, so we'll take a short break, we always do, and then we'll have time for questions.
Did he ever think the machines, they were 10 decimal, right?
Yeah.
Did he ever think to put them in binary?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And in fact, he didn't think that binary would be necessary, but he thought it would be possible.
Be simpler, right?
And be simpler. And in fact, the neo-Leibnizian calculating machine people have built up a binary calculating machine, and it somehow runs on marbles. I don't know how that works, but you can.
Okay, but he did.
Okay. He did. Yeah.
He realized it would be simpler. Okay, right.
Right. Yeah. Operationally simpler. Maybe when we're doing it, it isn't necessarily simpler, but when the machine functions, it can be simplified immensely. Yeah.
Now, my other more serious question is, if these machines are discrete, okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned the word at the end there, not in the same context. You used the analogy. You said an analog, and I was thinking,
Right.
wait a minute, analog computers.
Right. And that's basically Leibniz's idea. We exist as decimal thinkers in an analog world.
Okay, with calculus, because he didn't have deltas.
Calculus gives us an approximation of the interface. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we have this continuous world, but we're thinking, how do we? But the
We-
machines are all discrete.
We can only approximate. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that he was perfectly aware of. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it introduces so much efficiency. The transposition between codes, between one set of letters or another, or the transposition between an analog world and one that goes by digit.
Yeah.
There's so much inefficiency there.
There is. Yeah, well, you can, yeah, all depending on what you've got at your disposal, you can minimize the inefficiency. You can't eliminate it. There's going to be a gap. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Does that, in this philosophy, does that gap matter?
Oh yes. It matters lots, because it matters that in the final analysis, our understanding of reality is imperfect and has to rely on analogy
Yes.
rather than detailed exposition.
All right, so
Yeah.
let's get another poll question, please.
First, Nick, I'd like to apologize for coming in so late.
No problem.
What I heard was very interesting.
Good.
When you were talking about various security devices in World War II, I wonder if you have anything to say about the use of the Navajo code talkers.
We had even in World War I when we began this, you have it. Military communication is a complicated and many-leveled process. One thing you need to be able to do is sort of in the immediate battlefield, right? You have people doing stuff to which you must react in real time quite quickly, and therefore in this kind of communication for tactical purposes in immediate conflict situations doesn't have to be very, very demanding. You don't need to send the communication in an absolutely secure way, because the use time of the information is relatively short, and if you can delay the access time to it beyond the level of when the use time is expired, it's good enough for all practical purposes. So as a very quick and efficient way of doing it, we rounded up, as you were saying, Navajo mainly. We rounded up in Indian, native speakers of Indian, and retaught them their own language in the sense of providing them with training for the limited range of issues and the limited vocabulary needed for immediate military communication in battlefield situations. And we had these people communicate. They were given instruction in English. They transposed it into Pidgin Navajo, and then transmitted to their colleagues in the next unit or whatever what this instruction was. It was a very efficient and effective means of battlefield communication, and actually was much better than the purposes required, because the Germans never got to square one with figuring out what was being said and going on. Okay. The Japanese made the big mistake of thinking that their language was sufficiently complicated, inaccessible to the West, based on different conceptualizations and involving different ways of expression, that that they didn't need to be super concerned about security, and that was a mistake. We were pretty efficient at training up people who knew enough Japanese to be able to handle what was immediately necessary. Higher level communication, diplomatic communication, and so on required much greater degrees of secrecy. And the Japanese developed quite sophisticated machines, certainly as sophisticated as Enigma for handling that. The problem there was, and I recommend this to you as a good movie in its own right, Tora, 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 which gives you a picture of what the capacities were. We had very ingenious people working on Japanese higher level codes, and with a great degree of success.
Thanks for your talk. I would like to ask you something more detailed, if you can, on the relationship, if there is, between the binary calculation that Leibniz was developing and doing, and the mechanization of thought that we were talking at the end. Because for us, it's normal to think.
We think in binary when we're doing machines.
So the
Yes.
thing that you have shown,
Yes.
there are, for example, 5 columns.
Yes.
And there are some calculation, and I wonder what the reason for his work for developing this, and that if there were some connection with the. So for us, it's normal to think about the binary calculation as the metaphor of the mind, as a computer, and so on. There is something there. There is some similarity or difference, or they were completely different things.
First of all, we can't excuse Leibniz from doing things our way because he didn't have binary mathematics at his disposal. He did. He sort of invented and codified the whole thing. He could have designed his machine to operate on binary principles, and in fact, there are some suggestions of his where he indicates this could be done. And beyond that, there are, and I can give you the references here that I have at my fingertip, the Leibniz machine experts in Hanover have created Leibnizian calculating machines, more or less on Leibnizian principles, but working on a binary basis, following his own suggestions, so that there's no doubt that he realized this. But his own machine efforts at creating a calculating machine sort of antedate his concern for binary things and go back to the earlier period of it, and are based on natural decimal kinds of operations, which, as you say, could have perhaps been simplified in some way had he done it on binary principles. And he sort of came to realize that, but the machines that he worked on and improved throughout his life were all like the ones I pictured for you.
Yeah, thank you. So I was also at the premiere of the cryptographic machine, which was amazing to see in action. I'm curious though, so I didn't have this out at the time when you were first talking about this, but now that you put up the quotes again, I'm thinking, I don't actually understand the distinction that he's drawing. So, and really it comes down to, is he using machine in a different way? Are there like 2 different meanings of machine that he's working with here? Like, what really would be the difference between a divine machine and a human created
Human machine.
if they're both
Okay. All right. Leibniz was a child of the age of microscopes and telescopes, the age of the lens. And he was very much struck with the idea that if you go to a ditch somewhere, or you go to a lake somewhere, you fish out a glass of water, and you start looking at that under a microscope, you find that within that body of water, there are a teeming world of little critters of one kind or another. And this idea of fleas having ever smaller fleas to bite them, this idea that within of organic organization, that a human body is made up of systems and subsystems and subsystems, and ultimately cells and then subcells and so on. This idea that you could, when you pursue the constitution of nature in detail, you find smaller units of operation existing within smaller units of operation, existing within smaller units of operation. And that this isn't like Greek atomism. Greek atomism, you finally come to atoms, and they are literally uncuttable up. They're literally solid little units. You cannot get anything out of them smaller. They're impervious to any further reductive exercise. This idea that his monadology, right, has punctiform units of existence ultimately, that no matter how small you slice it, there's always a subunit of some sort. That's critical for him. So for him, there is, if you like, a discontinuity of thought. If you take an interval on a number axis and you slice it in half and you slice it in half and you slice it in half, you always get something smaller, but you never come to the end, right? In the ultimate limit, you come to something which is of a different order from a small interval, and that's a point. But you never reach it actually in the cutting up process. It's somehow the ultimate limit. All right, so there is a discontinuity between nature, as Leibniz conceived of it, at the ontological level of monads, of punctiform existence, and continuities, larger things. So there is a difference, and all you've got to come up against that when you look at what goes on here in the reduction of physical nature into smaller and smaller subunits. You won't ever reach an ultimate end, but you approximate it, and you can approximate perhaps the nature of what goes going on in some sort of way by analogy, and that's his idea. You're very unhappy looking about this. For him, the difference, on the one hand, the difference between the finite and the infinite is a difference in kind almost. And on the other hand, it's not totally different in kind. It's somehow the very, very minute gives us some indication of what the nature of reality is ultimately like. But we'll never know it. We're limited. We can't get there from here.
Okay, it's not a question, it's just rather a comment following up on the earlier exchange about the use of foreign languages in cryptography and military context. As far as I know, during the Battle of Britain, there was a substantial number of Polish and Czech
yes,
pilots.
indeed,
using their own native
indeed.
Language, and it confused not only the Germans but also their
air controllers, because the air controllers didn't, in the different reasons, didn't know what was going on. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and another thing is similar. I don't know if it's true, but I heard a story that during the Six-Day War in the Middle East, I think the Israeli pilots actually, Polish backgrounds, they were actually using the Polish language to confuse their Arab opponents.
Right.
Supposedly it worked very well.
Yeah, yeah, because in military operations, with people are communicating, there's always what is called chatter, and if you can make that chatter unintelligible, that's a help, because otherwise, not only your friends can use it, but your opponents as well. Yeah.
Thank you. I see a tension between the overall theme of your talk today and that passage. That passage sounds like there is this fundamental difference between organic bodies and human artifacts by
Yes.
humans. So organic bodies, they are comprised of parts, which are also comprised of parts, and
Yeah.
parts.
It goes on and on.
Right, on and on. The human artifacts, the human made artifacts are not like that.
Yes.
And then that seems to suggest that there is something. So if there is such a fundamental difference between, say, a human and an artifact, then it seems very natural to conclude that the intelligence a human has, there's some element that cannot be mimicked by any kind of a human artifacts. There is some, so it's the way we think, everything about the way you think cannot be just mimicked by this simple, human artifact because we are infinitely divisible or something. That's so. There must be some kind of a so. Leibniz may say that some elements of our thinking can be mimicked by our machines, but some elements can't. Does Leibniz say something like that?
Yes. Yeah. He has two lines of thought going. One of them is that there is, even at the subordinate level of lower levels of organization, there are thought analogous processes going on, so that there is no radical difference between that. Even for Leibniz, even the individual monads, even the ultimate constituents of nature, have an element of mode of operation which is thought-like in character. So he's got this idea of continuity. There are no radical breaks. They always are differences in degree of sophistication of performance rather than kinds. So that's one idea. But the other is that, yes, ultimately there are, so to speak, breaking points. Now, where those breaking points occur and how they occur and how we manage them is tricky and has been tricky since classical antiquity. Namely, we go back to the paradox of the heap, right? If I give you 1 grain of sand, you don't have a heap. And I give you another grain of sand and you don't have a heap. And when you give you n grains of sand that isn't the heap and you add 1 more, that doesn't transform it into a heap either. But yet, alas, when you keep this process up long ago, you realize after a while you get a heap. Where is the boundary between non-heap and heap? And there are lots of other paradoxes of that same nature. And Leibniz is sort of caught up in them. That is to say, he wants to say that ultimately you get to differences almost in kind, but I can't ever specify exactly at what point. That gets washed out in the continuity of things.
Good. So several of the questions have been circling around this question of what exactly is underlying this claim about the difference. And so I'm curious to what extent, I'm tempted to ask a counterfactual history question, like given what we now think about the nature of the physical universe and the place of life in it, would Leibniz have been committed to this still, its invisible parts all the way down? Or perhaps put it less anachronistically, to what extent is this an empirical hypothesis based on looking through microscopes, as you suggested, or some sort of reasoned principle? And if so, where's the flaw in that reasoning?
I think a problem that is out there and that we face is analogous to the problem that the atomists faced, and that is when you get down to smaller and smaller units, what is reality like? And the problem is that if you simply take a parameter like length or time or anything, you can always divide it up. You've got an interval of some sort. No matter how small it is, there's something else that is several units of magnitude smaller, and that keeps going. Now, what about our understanding of nature, right? We get baffled when we get down to very small units of scale. We don't even know quite what we're doing. You take string theory. What are the units of a string, and are they subunits? And what do you get when you get down to subunits? And what about the subunits? And then you get caught up in time, right? Because most of the physical phenomena that you're dealing with at very small levels of space are also out there only for very small levels of time. They're only blips on the scale of something or other, ultimately so brief you can't even detect them. We don't know how we can get down smaller and smaller and think clearly down to levels of magnitude that are pretty minute. But of course, in theory, there are always submagnitudes of the same level of difference, right? That we're coping with, and that gets tricky for us, and it's tricky for Leibniz, because just as he says that life at the monadic level and life at the level of monadic aggregates and things that occupy more space gets to be a discontinuity that's tricky to handle. We haven't, I think, quite escaped that either, because we don't know, we don't have a handle on things of an order of magnitude below, I don't know what level, it depends on the kind of phenomena you're talking about. But the point is, there is always something further down on the level of theoretical scale, and how reality comes to terms with that is, for us, baffling. And of course, the smaller down we go, the stranger, from our point of view, accustomed to things at the higher levels of magnitude, things become. The nature of nature of laws, the nature of the stability of phenomena, things get messy. I don't know if that doesn't help any, because it just says the issue is just as confused for us as it was for Leibniz. We can't fault him on that.
I'd just like to know more about the technological context for Leibniz's work. For example, were there other machines that he was influenced by in the construction of the line principle, and in various efforts to mechanize arithmetic, things of that sort?
The mechanization of arithmetic is rather crude from our point of view, right? He reduces multiplication to multiple additions, and so on. So and of course his machines only deal with the 4 standard arithmetical operations. He can't extract square roots. He can extract square roots, but not by the machine. He has to do a certain amount of tricky stuff to do that. So the mathematical technology of his day is, from our point of view, limited, and so is the physical technology of his day. And it's a matter of doing what you can with the sort of means of processing and inference and representation that are at your disposal. So there's no doubt that his calculating machine is highly limited, but it's a vast step above and beyond anything that was available elsewhere.
So he wasn't, can you point to any direct influences, or because he's so far ahead of the
In some regards, he was far ahead of what was going on. Right. Now, Babbage arithmetical machine is orders of magnitude ahead of Leibniz's, but the mechanization of coding machines, which didn't really happen until World War I, when it became necessary, for the first generation was no advance on Leibniz at all. So you can say that until about 1920, from 1670, right, 250 years or so, he was ahead of the field.
Yeah, please. Yeah, but I think that from the Monet's perspective, the things that emerge in our, perception actually is kind of programmed, so it's kind of just emerging in our mind.
Yes.
But from the phenomena in our thoughts, it's kind of like that we're dealing with some informations. We are actually kind of produce some new informations. How can we explain this kind of
I'm not sure I exactly know what the problem is, but if the problem is that we are adding information from our perspective, then that information is going to include a certain amount of misinformation as well. That is to say, it obviously we don't have any. The monads all have their own life plan, their own individual concept. We don't have any of those. Our only point of interaction with the metaphysical level of Leibniz's monadology is in relation to ourselves. Right? We, as organized beings, have a dominant monad who determines a whole variety of stuff about us. But our access to that information is very incomplete. And the conceptual mechanisms that we use in thinking about it are very incomplete. And many of the phenomena that we deal with don't have a counterpart at the level of ultimate reality, but are only emergent and lie in the mind of the beholder. So there's no the terms of reference in which we conduct our mental business may be very far out of sync with what there is. Think of the old way of printing pictures. Right? The old way of printing pictures in newspapers until a generation or so ago consists of little dots, right? And when you look at the thing more closely in a magnifying glass, the picture disappears. It's an emergent phenomenon only at a level of blurring that goes with a certain distancing from what the thing is that's being represented. So there's no necessarily substantive continuity. I mean, this is the old classic problem of appearance and reality. There's no necessarily substantive connection between the way things appear and what their constitution in reality is like, and that's a problem for philosophy in general, but it's particularly a problem for Leibniz because there are these. The phenomena there are two kinds of phenomena for Leibniz. So some of them are so-called well-founded. They have a connection with what goes on in the monadic realm. You look at me or at the table, that's fine. Then there are ill-founded phenomena, mirages, pink elephants in the corner on the day after, and one thing and another. These are phenomena, all right, but they have no appropriate foundation in the realm of what goes on in nature. And he has to work with that distinction. So because it's a double problem, a phenomenon doesn't speak for itself. The mirage doesn't come in with a little label saying, I'm a mirage. You have to figure that out. And so there's a discontinuity between the phenomena as they appear to you and what the well-founding is. And then even in the case of well-founded phenomena, there's a difference in level between how the phenomenon appears to the perceiver and what the underlying reality is that produces it, which can involve causal processes where things get very, very different.
All right, I think it's time to stop. Let's thank see you on Friday at 3:30 and on
Have a nice semester.
You too, indeed. Keep in touch.
I will.
And let me know what's going on.
I had one question, please.
Sure, please sit down.
So can you take your mind really quick?
Oh yeah, of course. I don't think.
It's going to be brief and not embarrassing. Thank you.
I know.